The conference room aboard the Unce Persephone hummed with quiet, hopeful chatter. Captain Mara Solen stood near the viewport, watching the distant glimmer of the neutral station where humanity's first contact would take place. The station hung like a polished silver teardrop against the starfield, a structure gifted by the Kra'vak Dominion as a gesture of peace. Mara's dress uniform felt stiff, the gold braid on her shoulders still unfamiliar after her recent promotion. At 32, she was the youngest diplomatic officer in the fleet, chosen for her calm demeanor and sharp mind. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her brown eyes missed nothing. She'd spent 10 years in the outer colonies, negotiating trade disputes and mediating minor strikes. Nothing had prepared her for this. Nervous, Ambassador Chen appeared beside her, a stately man with silver hair and a gentle smile. Terrified, Mara admitted quietly, but it's a good kind of terror, the kind that means something important is happening. Chen nodded. The Kra'vak have been broadcasting for 3 months. Their language is complex, but the translation matrix is solid. They want peace, trade, cultural exchange. This is the moment we've dreamed of since we first looked at the stars. Mara turned to study the tactical display. The small human fleet hung in formation, 3 diplomatic cruisers, 4 escort destroyers, and a science vessel. All unarmed by treaty agreement, their weapons pods replaced with extra sensor suites and cultural archives. The Kra'vak had insisted. To show trust, they'd said, we will meet with open hands. A soft chime signaled the approach of the Kra'vak delegation. The station's docking ring rotated, and a sleek obsidian ship emerged from the far side, its hull etched with glowing crimson lines. It was immense, at least 5 times the mass of the Persephone, and it moved with predatory grace. They're magnificent, someone breathed. Mara's stomach tightened, but she pushed the feeling aside. First contact jitters. She'd read the psychological profiles. Everyone on this mission had been screened for xenophobia. She was just projecting human fears onto an alien design. The airlock cycled, and the Kra'vak came aboard. They were tall bipedal with scaled hides the color of old bronze. Their heads were elongated, with 4 black eyes arranged in a diamond pattern, and their mouths were lipless slits that curved into what might have been a smile. They wore flowing robes of deep purple and silver, and their hands ended in 3 long, elegant fingers. The leader, who identified himself as Ambassador Verk, stepped forward and bowed. His voice, translated through a small device on his chest, was smooth and resonant. Greetings, children of Earth. We have watched you grow from afar, and we are pleased to finally meet you as equals. Ambassador Chen bowed in return. We are honored, Ambassador Verk. Humanity has long hoped for this day. The ceremony lasted an hour. Gifts were exchanged. A crystalline sculpture from the Kra'vak that sang with captured starlight, and a hand-bound book of human poetry, printed on real paper, from the Earth delegation. Verk held the book with what seemed like genuine reverence. Words are the seeds of understanding, he said. We shall cherish this. Mara felt the knot in her stomach loosen. This was going well, too well maybe, but she silenced that cynical inner voice. She was here to observe, to learn, to represent her species with dignity. Then Verk gestured toward the viewport. We have prepared a celebration, a light display to honor this union. Please watch. The human delegation turned to the window. Outside, the Kra'vak fleet had assembled, 12 ships, then 20, then 50, materializing from stealth fields that no human sensor had detected. Their hulls gleamed with crimson light, and weapons ports irised open. Ambassador! Chen's voice was suddenly sharp. Verk's lipless mouth stretched wider. You came with open hands. That was your first mistake. Your second was believing the strong would ever treat the weak as equals. Your world is rich. Your bodies are fragile. You will serve the Dominion. The lights on the station flickered. The Persephone's klaxons screamed. Mara lunged for the emergency console, but Verk was faster. His 3-fingered hand clamped around Chen's throat and squeezed. There was a wet crack, and the ambassador crumpled. All ships, evasive. The captain's order was cut off as the Kra'vak cruisers opened fire. Mara saw the Unce horizon, an escort destroyer, vanish in a white-hot ball of expanding gas. The science vessel shattered next, its debris field sparkling like a macabre firework display. The Persephone shuddered as beams of crimson energy carved through her hull. The deck pitched, and Mara was thrown against a bulkhead. Smoke filled the corridor. Alarms blared, meaningless now. She crawled. Her vision blurred, her left arm screamed with pain, broken probably, but she kept moving. The escape pods were only 20 meters away. She'd memorized the ship's layout during the endless briefings, and that muscle memory now saved her life. Behind her, she heard screams and the hiss of atmosphere venting. A Kra'vak boarding party. It didn't matter. She reached the pod bay, slapped the release, and tumbled into a coffin-sized capsule. The hatch sealed automatically. Through the small porthole, she saw the Persephone's bridge section tear away, bodies spilling into the void. The pod launched. Acceleration crushed her into the couch, and then there was only the cold silence of space and the distant, dying light of the human fleet. She floated for 3 days. The pod's emergency beacon was weak, its power fading. Mara drifted in and out of consciousness, her arms swollen and useless, her mouth dry as ash. She had time to replay the betrayal over and over. Verk's smile, the way he'd held the poetry book, the wet sound of Chen's neck breaking. She'd been so stupid. They'd all been so stupid. On the 4th day, a salvage hauler called the Wandering Gale found her. The captain, a grizzled woman named Iskra with burned scars on half her face, pulled Mara from the pod and gave her water. "You're lucky," Iskra said. "The Kra'vak don't leave survivors. They've been hitting our colonies for 2 weeks. Earth's under blockade. We're losing." Mara closed her eyes and let the grief and rage settle into something cold and hard. "Take me home," she said. "I have work to do." Earth was a world under siege. The Kra'vak fleet hung in orbit like a crown of thorns, bombarding military installations with precision strikes. Major cities were spared, but only because the Dominion wanted the infrastructure intact. Slaves need roofs, after all. The human defense forces fought with desperate courage, throwing every ship and missile platform they had at the invaders, but the technological gap was a chasm. Human railguns and lasers glanced off Kra'vak shields like thrown pebbles. Mara spent 2 months in recovery. The doctors rebuilt her arm with titanium pins and synth flesh grafts. She did her physical therapy with grim determination, watching the news feeds as colony after colony fell silent. The Dominion's propaganda broadcasts were slick and smug: surrender and serve. Resistance is inefficient. We are merciful masters. By the time she was cleared for duty, Mara had been promoted to lieutenant commander, a field promotion born of necessity since so many ranking officers were dead. The Unified Earth Command assigned her to the Intelligence Division, a desk job analyzing Kra'vak tactics. She hated it. She wanted to be on a ship, a weapon, something that could hit back. But she was good at her work, and her reports helped the surviving fleet execute a handful of successful ambushes. Small victories, pinpricks. Then the Mars survey came. The Kra'vak ignored the red planet. It was a barren wasteland, a dead world with no strategic value. But old colonial records hinted at abandoned mining outposts from humanity's early spacefaring days, and Earth Command was desperate for any resource they could use. Mara volunteered immediately. She'd spent a year on Mars during her early career, surveying potential settlement sites, and she knew the terrain better than anyone else available. Her team was small: a geologist named Dr. Anya Patel, a grizzled ex-miner named Cormac, and 4 Marine escorts. They took a stealth-modified shuttle through the blockade, hugging the asteroid belt to mask their signature, and landed in the vast canyon system of Val's Marineris 2 weeks later. The landscape was rust-red and ancient, carved by winds that hadn't changed in 1 billion years. Mara felt a strange sense of homecoming as she stepped onto the dusty surface. She'd always been drawn to Mars, even as a child. There was something about its desolate beauty that spoke to her. "Reading magnetic anomalies 3 clicks east," Patel said, studying her scanner. "Something dense, buried deep. Could be a magma pocket, could be artificial." "Mining outpost?" Mara asked. "Maybe. The signature's weird. It's not metal like iron or nickel. I don't know what it is." They followed the readings into a narrow side canyon, their boots kicking up fine red powder. The anomaly led to a sheer cliff face that looked natural, but gave off readings that made Patel's instruments spike into the red. Cormac pressed his gloved hand against the rock. "This isn't rock," he said. "It's some kind of composite. Feels wrong." Mara ordered the Marines to set charges. The blast tore a hole in the cliff, and behind it was darkness, a smooth, perfectly circular tunnel descending at a steep angle. The air that wafted out was stale but breathable, according to the sensors. Oxygen-nitrogen mix, slightly higher pressure than Mars' surface. "That's not a mine," Patel whispered. "That's architecture." They descended with helmet lamps cutting through the blackness. The tunnel walls were lined with a material that shimmered faintly in their lights like frozen moonlight. Strange symbols were etched at intervals, geometric patterns that tugged at something in the back of Mara's mind. They felt familiar, not alien, not at all. The tunnel opened into a vast underground cavern, and Mara's breath caught in her throat. It was a city. Towers of pale stone and gleaming metal rose from the cavern floor, their architecture elegant and sweeping, with curves that mimicked flowing water or wind-blown sand. There were plazas with silent fountains, arches that soared impossibly high, and windows that still glowed with a soft inner light. The city was intact, preserved, as if its inhabitants had simply walked away yesterday. But it was the style that made Mara's heart hammer. The proportions, the aesthetic, the sense of scale. It was human, not alien designed for humans. Human. Doorways were human-sized. The staircases had steps that matched a human gait. The faded murals on the walls depicted figures that were unmistakably people, 2 arms, 2 legs, heads with eyes and mouths, dressed in flowing garments. "This isn't possible," Patel breathed. "This city is millions of years old. The carbon dating on the surface dust alone, it predates anything on Earth by an order of magnitude." Cormac crossed himself. "God in heaven, were we here first?" Mara walked forward in a daze. She felt pulled, guided by an instinct she couldn't name. Her boots echoed in the silent streets. She passed a market square where stone stalls still held the shadows of ancient goods. She passed a garden where the fossilized remains of plants that had never grown on Earth curled toward a false sun that had long since gone dark. At the city's center stood a spire taller than the rest, a needle of white stone that pierced the cavern's ceiling. Its base was ringed with more of those geometric symbols, and as Mara approached, they began to glow. A voice spoke. Not aloud, but inside her head a resonance that bypassed her ears and resonated directly in her mind. "Welcome, child of the migration, you have returned." Mara froze. The others had stopped behind her, their weapons half raised, their faces pale. "Who are you?" she asked aloud. The glowing symbols pulsed, and a hologram coalesced in the air before her. It was a woman, or the image of one, with features that were at once exotic and achingly familiar. Her skin was a warm bronze, her hair a cascade of dark curls, and her eyes held the light of stars. She wore a simple white robe, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and gentle. "I am the Guardian. I was placed here by your ancestors, the first children, to await your return. I have slept for 65 million years, but now you are here and I awaken." 65 million years, Mara repeated numbly. "That's the dinosaurs, the asteroid." The Guardian's image smiled sadly. "The asteroid was no accident. It was a weapon deployed by an enemy you know well. But that is a later tale. First, you must understand your true heritage." She gestured, and the hologram expanded into a 3-dimensional projection of the solar system. Mars was blue and green, covered in oceans and forests, a world alive. Earth was a turbulent, volcanic wilderness. "Your species was born on this world, which you call Mars. We called it Elysium. Humanity flourished here for millions of years, building a civilization of art, science, and peace. We reached the stars. We made contact with many species, including the one that now calls itself the Kra'vak Dominion." The projection shifted to show sleek ships, ancient versions of the obsidian vessels that had destroyed the Persephone, attacking Martian cities. "The Kra'vak were conquerors then as they are now. We fought them for centuries. In the end, we drove them from our space, but the cost was terrible. Our climate, already strained, began to collapse. We saw the end coming and knew we could not save Elysium." The hologram zoomed in on Earth, showing massive arc-like ships descending through the atmosphere. "We sent expeditions to the Third World. It was harsh and dangerous, filled with massive reptiles, but it could support life. We knew that to survive there, our descendants would need to adapt. So we encoded genetic instructions to reshape our bodies over generations, to make you shorter, sturdier, better suited to a higher gravity world. We left caches of our technology here, sealed away, protected by guardians like me. We hoped that one day, when you were ready, you would rediscover your birthright." Mara's voice was a whisper. We forgot everything." "You survived," the Guardian said gently. "That was the most important thing. The rest can be remembered, and now you have need of it. I have observed the Kra'vak's return. I have seen the destruction they have wrought upon your people. The enemy we defeated long ago has come back to claim our cradle, and they do not realize whose children you truly are." The projection expanded to show the solar system again, and this time, points of light blinked on Mars' surface, dozens of them, then hundreds. "The caches are intact. The forge beneath Olympus Mons still functions. It can build ships, weapons, armor, tools of war that the Kra'vak have never faced. The ancient enemy thinks humanity weak because they remember only the primitive apes they glimpsed from afar. They do not know that the fire of Elysium still burns." Mara turned to face her team. Patel was crying silently, tears tracking through the dust on her cheeks. Cormac's jaw was set, his eyes blazing with a fierce, hard light. The Marines stood at attention, their grips tight on their rifles. "We can win?" Mara asked. The Guardian's smile was no longer sad. "You can make them regret the day they first looked upon your star. The forge awaits, child of Elysium. Will you take up your inheritance?" Mara straightened her spine. The cold knot of rage that had lived in her chest since the betrayal flared into something hotter, brighter, and infinitely more focused. She thought of Chen's broken body, the horizon exploding, the colonies silenced one by one. "Yes," she said. "Show us." The forge was buried beneath Olympus Mons, the largest volcano in the solar system, a mountain so massive that its peak rose above the thin Martian atmosphere. A hidden entrance, keyed to human DNA and triggered by the Guardian's signal, opened into a cavern that could have swallowed a city. Inside, rows of assembly arrays stretched for kilometers. their surfaces dark and dormant. The Guardian guided them through the awakening sequence, and lights began to flicker on, first a few, then thousands, then millions, until the cavern blazed with a cold blue luminescence. The arrays hummed to life, their molecular forges ready to construct anything the Guardian's database contained. And that database was vast. Mara stood in a command center carved from living crystal, her hands resting on a console that responded to her thoughts. Guardian's knowledge flowed into her mind through a neural interface. Schematics for warships that defied physics as humans understood it, powered by zero-point energy reactors and armed with weapons that could fold space or unravel atomic bonds. Armor that phased partially out of reality, making it impervious to conventional attack. Engines that could cross light years in hours, not decades. The Kra'vak have had millions of years to advance, Mara said. Won't they have kept pace? The Guardian's voice was calm. The Kra'vak do not innovate. They conquer and assimilate, stealing technology from subjugated species. They have grown powerful, yes, but they have not changed in any fundamental way. Their ships still use fusion cores and plasma weaponry. Their shields rely on electromagnetic deflection. They have never encountered phase shift technology because they killed the species that invented it before it could be shared. We, however, preserved everything, and we have had 65 million years to let our AI systems refine our designs. What you see here is not the technology of ancient Elysium. It is the technology ancient Elysium would have developed if it had never fallen. Mara absorbed this. The revenge she craved was no longer a desperate fantasy. It was a blueprint. Build it all, she ordered. As fast as you can. The forge responded. For 3 months, Earth bled. The Kra'vak blockade tightened. High Warmaster Zarkin, a scarred and ancient warlord who had crushed a dozen civilizations, watched from his flagship, the Worldbane, as his fleets reduced human resistance to scattered guerrilla cells. He was a patient hunter. He had learned over millennia that the best way to break a species was to starve it of hope, bombard their food production, snipe their fleeing ships, broadcast their leaders' pleas for mercy, and then execute the leaders anyway. He stood on the bridge, his 4 black eyes scanning the tactical displays with cold satisfaction. The human defense network was nearly gone. Soon, he would deploy the atmospheric processors that would terraform Earth into a more comfortable environment for Kra'vak physiology. The native life would be repurposed or eliminated. The planet would become a productive slave world. My Warmaster, his intelligence officer, reported, we have detected faint energy signatures from the 4th world, the dead one they call Mars. They are irregular, possibly mining activity. Zarkin dismissed it with a flick of his 3-fingered hand. Let them dig in the dust. It will avail them nothing. What is the status of the final assault preparations? 80% complete, 3 standard days. Accelerate. I want their cities burning by the end of the cycle. He turned back to the viewport. The blue-white marble of Earth hung there, so fragile, so ripe. He felt no malice toward humanity. They were simply a resource to be exploited, like iron ore or fertile soil. The concept of betrayal that his underlings had discussed, the broken treaty, the murder of the diplomats, meant nothing to him. Strength was the only treaty that mattered. The strong took. The weak gave. It was the fundamental law of the universe, and Zarkin was its most faithful servant. He would soon learn that laws can be rewritten. On Mars, the first new warship rose from the forge. Mara watched from the Crystal Command Center as the vessel took shape. It was called the Retribution, and it was unlike anything human eyes had ever seen. Its hull was a shifting, iridescent silver that seemed to fold in on itself at the edges, existing partially in a quantum superposition state that made targeting sensors slide off like water. Its primary weapon was a singularity projector, a device that could generate a microscopic black hole inside an enemy ship, consuming it from within before evaporating in a burst of gamma radiation. Secondary weapons included phase disruptors that bypassed shields entirely and torpedoes loaded with space-time shears that could bisect a cruiser along its dimensional axis. It was, Mara thought, a work of terrifying art. The crew was drawn from the survivors of the blockade, soldiers and spacers who had lost everything, families, homes, ships, and who now burned with the same cold fire that drove Mara. They trained in simulators that the Guardian provided, their minds linked through neural interfaces that gave them instinctive control over the ship's systems. The learning curve was steep, but they climbed it with desperate determination. Mara herself spent hours in the captain's chair, her consciousness merged with the Retribution's AI, feeling the ship as an extension of her own body. She learned to sense the curvature of space, the flow of dark energy, the subtle vibrations of particles that physicists had not yet named. The ship became her skin, the weapons became her fists. Captain Solen, the Guardian's voice said one day, the fleet is ready. Mara opened her eyes. On the tactical display, a fleet of 127 Mars-class warships hung in formation, their hulls shimmering with the same eerie silver light. Each was smaller than a Kra'vak cruiser, but the power readings coming off them were almost obscene. Support vessels, tenders, carriers, troop transports swelled the numbers further. It was not a large fleet by the Dominion standards, but size was irrelevant when the technological gap was an abyss. "Earth Command has been briefed," Mara asked. "They have. They are coordinating planetary defenses to coincide with our strike. When we hit the Kra'vak home system, the fleet here will be forced to withdraw to reinforce. Earth's remaining forces will harry them during the retreat." Mara stood. Her uniform was new, black and silver, with the ancient symbol of Elysium on the shoulder, a circle bisected by a wave representing the migration across the void. "Then let's not keep them waiting. Fleet, this is Captain Solen. Set course for Kra'vak Prime. Phase jump on my mark." The fleet's engines engaged and the ships folded out of reality, slipping into a dimensional layer where distances meant nothing. The transit was smooth, a gentle lurch rather than the violent acceleration of conventional FTL. In the bridge's main viewer, stars became streaks of prismatic light. Mara sat in her command chair, and for the first time in months she allowed herself to think about what was coming. Not the battle, that was a matter of tactics and firepower, and she trusted both, but the aftermath. The revenge. She had dreamed of it in the escape pod, in the hospital, in the dark hours before the Retribution's launch. She had imagined Verk's face when he saw her again. She had imagined Zarkin begging for mercy that would not come. But now, with the power of an ancient civilization thrumming at her fingertips, she found that her hatred had cooled into something purer. Not forgiveness, never that, but a kind of clarity. The Kra'vak had made a choice, and they would face the consequences of that choice. It wasn't personal, it was balance. The universe, she thought, had a way of restoring balance. Sometimes it just needed a little help. The Kra'vak home system was a fortress. 8 heavily armed defense stations ringed the innermost world, a scorched rock tidally locked to its star. The fleet yards at the second planet churned out warships in a constant stream. The third planet, Kra'vak Prime, was a world of rust-red oceans and dark continents, its skies thick with orbital platforms and patrol craft. High War Master Zarkin's personal defense fleet, 300 capital ships, maintained a permanent patrol. It was, by any conventional measure, an unassailable stronghold. The Kra'vak had held it for 50,000 years, and no enemy had ever breached its inner defenses. The human fleet emerged from phase space half a light second from the outermost defense station. There was no warning, no hyperspace signatures, no tachyonic wake. One moment, the system's sensor net showed clear space. The next, 127 silver ships simply existed where nothing had been before. The Kra'vak defense coordinator, a veteran named Jorath, stared at his displays in disbelief. His first instinct was to check the scanners for malfunction. His second was to sound the alarm. Alert. Unidentified fleet in Sector 7. Battle stations. All ships scramble. But the human fleet had already begun its work. The Retribution's singularity projector lanced out, a beam of distorted space-time that struck the nearest defense station and punched a micro-black hole into its heart. For an instant, the station contracted into a point of infinite density, then erupted as the black hole evaporated, releasing a blast of energy that shattered 3 nearby patrol ships. The station was gone, replaced by an expanding cloud of superheated debris. Mara's voice was calm. "Target the fleet yards, fire at will." The human ships spread out, their weapons slicing through the Kra'vak defenders with mechanical precision. Phase disruptors flickered, and Kra'vak shields, designed to deflect plasma and kinetics, offered no resistance at all. Torpedoes loaded with space-time shears cut cruisers in half as cleanly as a scalpel through flesh. The defense stations, caught off guard and unable to lock onto the phase-shifted hulls, fell one by one. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted 41 minutes. When it was over, the Kra'vak fleet yards were burning, their construction slips twisted into modern sculptures by gravitational anomalies. The defense stations were all destroyed. The home fleet had been reduced from 300 ships to a scattered, panicked remnant fleeing toward the outer system. And the Retribution hung in orbit over Kra'vak Prime, its weapons trained on the capital city. Mara opened a channel to the planet. It was wideband, unencrypted, broadcast on every frequency the Kra'vak used. "This is Captain Mara Solen of the Elysian Reclamation Fleet," she said. "High War Master Zarkin is to surrender himself immediately, along with the entire Dominion Council. Any military vessel that does not power down its weapons will be destroyed. Any planetary defense system that targets us will be annihilated. You have 10 minutes to comply." The response was chaos. On Kra'vak Prime, the ruling caste erupted in panic. Zarkin was not there. He was still commanding the siege of Earth, light years away, but the Dominion Council, a gathering of ancient and decadent politicians who had not faced a real threat in millennia, convened an emergency session in their obsidian palace. Some called for surrender. Others, more arrogant, demanded a counterattack. "We still have the planetary batteries?" One councilor shouted. "We can burn them from the sky." They destroyed the defense fleet in less than an hour, another pointed out. "What makes you think the surface guns will fare better? We can negotiate, offer them something. Everyone has a price. They are humans, the vermin from the third world. They cannot defeat us." The argument raged until the 10-minute deadline expired. Mara watched the countdown on her display. When it reached 0, she spoke a single word. "Target the military headquarters complex. Low-yield singularity. Fire." The Kra'vak High Command Center, a sprawling complex of towers and bunkers on the planet's equator, vanished into a brief, brilliant pinprick of darkness. The shockwave leveled everything within a 50-kilometer radius. No one inside survived. Mara reopened the channel. "That was a demonstration. The next target will be the Council Palace. You have 5 minutes." The Dominion Council surrendered unconditionally 2 minutes later. The trial, if that's what it could be called, was held on Kra'vak Prime, in the same council chamber where the Dominion had planned the subjugation of 100 species. The surviving councilors knelt on the cold stone floor, their bronze scales dull with fear. Mara stood before them, flanked by Marines in phase-shift armor, her expression unreadable. "You betrayed a peaceful first contact," she said. "You murdered our diplomats. You bombed our colonies. You tried to enslave our world. By your own laws, the strong take from the weak. So tell me, what should the strong do to you?" The councilors trembled. One, braver or more foolish than the others, spoke up. "Mercy," he rasped. "We beg for mercy." "Mercy," Mara repeated. "Did you show mercy to the Ambrosians when you glassed their homeworld? Did you show mercy to the Sketh when you harvested their young for your bioforges? Did you show mercy to my ambassador when you crushed his throat in front of me?" The councilor flinched. "That was different. They were weaker," Mara finished. "Yes, I know you built an empire on the bones of the weak and you called it the natural order. Well, today the natural order has shifted. Humanity is no longer weak." She gestured and the Marines dragged the councilors to their feet. "The Dominion is dissolved. Your slave worlds are free. Your military is disbanded. Your technology will be seized and dismantled. As for you, you will be exiled to a world of our choosing. It is a barren, dying planet, much like the one my ancestors left when they fled Elysium. You will have no technology, no ships, no weapons. You will survive by your own hands or you will not. It is more than you ever gave to those you conquered." The councilors were led away, their protests swallowed by the hum of the Marines' armor. Mara watched them go and then she turned to the viewport. The stars looked different from here, sharper, clearer, or maybe that was just her. She thought of Verk, Zarkin, the crew of the Persephone. She thought of the billions who had died in the months of siege. Revenge was not a healing thing, she realized. It didn't fill the hollow spaces inside her. But it was a restoring thing. It put the world back into a shape that made sense. There would be more battles ahead. Zarkin was still on the loose, though his fleet would soon learn that their home system had fallen. The remnants of the Dominion would fight to the last, because predators don't know how to stop being predators. But humanity had the tools now, and the knowledge, and the will. She was still standing there when her calm officer's voice came through. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from Earth. The Kra'vak blockade fleet is in full retreat. High Warmaster Zarkin's flagship has been sighted fleeing toward the outer system. Earth Command is requesting instructions." Mara smiled. It was not a gentle smile. "Tell them to pursue. I want Zarkin brought to me alive. And if he resists, he will resist. That's what predators do. But make sure he understands one thing before the end." She turned from the viewport, her eyes hard as the Martian stone that had sheltered her ancestors' legacy. "Make sure he knows that he was beaten by the children of the world he dismissed as a dead rock. Make sure he knows that he lost to Mars." The chase lasted 2 weeks. Zarkin's flagship, the Worldbane, was a monster, a dreadnought 10 kilometers long, bristling with enough firepower to scour a planet. But it was slow, built for intimidation rather than speed, and the human ships were faster and more maneuverable. They harried it through a dozen jump points, picking off its escort ships one by one, never giving it time to regroup or repair. In the end, Zarkin made his stand in the shadow of a dying star, a red giant whose bloated atmosphere painted the void in shades of crimson and gold. It was a fitting backdrop, a star on the verge of its own death, mirroring the end of the Kra'vak Dominion. The Retribution led the assault. Mara piloted the ship herself, her mind fused with the AI, feeling the phase disruptors fire as naturally as she breathed. The Worldbane's shields flared and failed. Its plasma cannons, so devastating against conventional targets, scattered uselessly off the Retribution's shifting hull. The human boarding teams cut through the dreadnought's hull like a can opener, and Marines in phase-shift armor stormed the corridors. Mara went with them. It was, she knew, an unnecessary risk. The mission commander shouldn't be on the front line, but she needed to see this through. She needed to face Zarkin herself. They fought through squads of Kra'vak warriors, the Dominion's elite, but the phase-shift armor made the Marines nearly invulnerable, and the singularity rifles turned the enemy into collapsing masses of distorted flesh. The battle was brutal and short. Within an hour, the Marines had reached the bridge. Zarkin stood at the center of the command deck, his 4 eyes blazing with a fury that bordered on madness. His scales were scarred from ancient battles. His claws, each the length of a human forearm, were crusted with dried blood from the officers he'd killed in impotent rage as his ship was boarded. When Mara stepped through the smoke, he let out a roar that shook the bulkheads. You are nothing, vermin, weaklings, you cannot defeat the Dominion." Mara walked toward him, her phase-shift armor humming, her face visible through the clear faceplate. She wanted him to see her eyes. She wanted him to remember. "You met us with open hands," said, her voice amplified by the armor's speakers. "You called us weak. You broke your word and murdered our people, and now you stand in the ruins of your empire screaming that the vermin cannot defeat you. Look around, Warmaster, you've already been defeated." Zarkin lunged. His claws slashed at her armor, sparking off the phase-shifted surface, finding no purchase. Mara caught his wrist in an armored gauntlet and squeezed. The bones shattered with a sound like breaking ice. Zarkin screamed and fell to his knees. Mara looked down at him. The rage she'd carried for so long was still there, but it was no longer controlling her. She was its master now. She could end him here, and part of her wanted to, but death would be too quick, too easy. "You will live," she said. "You will live and you will remember. You are the last High Warmaster of the Kra'vak Dominion. You will watch your empire crumble into dust. You will see your people stripped of their weapons and their conquered worlds. And then, when there is nothing left for you to rule, you will be taken to a small, barren world on the edge of your former territory. You will be left there with no tools, no ships, and no subjects. You will live out the rest of your days in the dirt as you would have forced us to do." She released his broken wrist, and he crumpled to the deck. "Take him away." The Marines dragged the Warmaster off his own bridge. Mara stood in the silence that followed, surrounded by the wreckage of the Dominion's greatest warship. On the main viewer, the dying star pulsed its last light across the void. She opened a channel to the fleet. "This is Captain Solen. The world bane is secured. The war is over. Let's go home." The victory celebrations lasted for weeks. Earth cities, battered but unbroken, filled with light and music. The returning fleet was met with parades and tears and 1,000 memorials for the fallen. Mara was given medals she didn't want and titles she didn't need, but she accepted them graciously because they mattered to the people. The wider galaxy was in chaos in the best possible way. The Dominion's slave worlds, dozens of them, scattered across 100 light-years, were liberated. Some had been subjugated for so long that they had forgotten the concept of freedom. Earth, now the seat of a new alliance called the Elysium Compact, took on the monumental task of helping them rebuild. It was not easy. It would take generations. But humanity, it turned out, had a talent for stubborn compassion. On Mars, the great cavern cities were open to colonists. The Guardian's archives, once they were fully translated, revealed a wealth of art, literature, philosophy, and science that would redefine human culture for centuries. The Forge continued to produce ships, not for war, but for exploration and trade. Humanity's lost heritage became its future. Mara returned to Elysium, the first city, the one she had discovered in Val's Marineris, 3 months after Zarkin's capture. She walked the silent streets alone, her boots echoing on the ancient stone. The city was no longer dark. The Guardian's systems had been restored, and the towers glowed with soft light, and the fountains had been coaxed back to life. The air was clean and cool, scented with something that might have been jasmine or might have been a flower that had not bloomed for 65 million years. She stopped in the market square where she had first seen the fossilized plants. A statue had been erected there, a new one made by human hands. It depicted a woman in flowing robes, her arms open, her face lifted to the stars. The plaque beneath it read, "For those who crossed the void, for those who remembered, for the Guardian." Was silent for a moment. The Kra'vak killed because they believed it was their right. You killed because it was necessary to stop them. The difference is not in the act, but in the intent and the restraint. You offered them terms. You spared their civilian population. You are rebuilding what they tore down. That is not weakness. That is the strength to break the cycle. Mara nodded slowly. "The strong take from the weak," she quoted. "That was Zarkin's law, but we're writing a new one." "What law would that be?" Mara looked at the statue, at the woman with open arms and starward eyes. "The strong protect the weak. That's what my ancestors did when they sent the arks to Earth. They didn't give up. They didn't let the darkness win. They saved what they could and hoped we'd be better someday." She smiled, a real smile, the first one in a long time. "I think we're getting there." She turned away from the statue and walked toward the city center, where the spire of the Guardian's tower rose against the cavern's false sky. There was work to do. There was always work to do. But for the first time since the Persephone died, the weight on her shoulders felt less like a burden and more like a purpose. Behind her, the Guardian watched, and in the depths of its ancient programming, something that might have been pride stirred. The children of Elysium had come home. And far across the galaxy, on a nameless world of red sand and thin air, a broken creature called Zarkin clawed at the dirt with his one good hand and howled his fury at the uncaring stars. There was no one to hear him. There was no one coming to save him. The former High Warmaster of the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known was alone, powerless and utterly forgotten. The universe, it turned out, had a very long memory and a very sharp sense of irony. Somewhere in the distance, a dust storm was building, and the sky was the color of dried blood.